Welcome to the Black Male Impact. Today we have as guest Mr. Devin Anglin. Mr. Anglin, welcome to the Black Male Impact.
Thank you for having me.
Man, it's a pleasure having you here. Before we get into the conversation itself, Mr. Anglin, I've been an educator for over 16 years. He's passionate and experienced, and he have been working with young men and women. And he's also with the YMCA, where he's a national coordinator of boys and young men of color. But before we get into the conversation, I will allow Mr. Anglin to share more with us about himself before we start this conversation today. The floor is yours. Please go ahead and share with the listeners who you are before we get started.
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me. My name is Devin Anglin. I am the national coordinator of the YMCA's Boys and Young Men of Color National Strategy. Born and raised in Rochester, New York, and as you said, very elegantly, if I may add, I've been an educator or in the education youth development space for over 16 years. If you do the math, that's more than half my life. I started when I was 14 years old by way of my own youth development programming led by Black men. And just seeing other Black men leading me is kind of what made me stick to it. And, growing up as an athlete, and, that's the one thing that was always just pushed in front of me by way of TV or, just every day playing outside. It was a different path that I didn't know that I could be on. So my upbringing in Rochester has always been kind of centered in my youth development programming as a youth. And then just naturally, I just always gravitated somewhere. Wherever I was in the world, I always gravitated to youth development programs in whatever way, shape, or form I could. And, 16, 17 years later, here I am as a national coordinator with the YMCA, the largest youth serving organization in this country. So, yeah, I guess that is a very short synopsis of who I am. And I'm glad, again, to be on this show and look forward to the conversation.
And it's great just listening to you and taking on this role from such a young age. Really shows the type of person you are. It shows your commitment to service. It shows your commitment to giving back. It shows your commitment to see your fellow peers doing better. Because one of the best way to lead or to empower is to be the example. And that's what you have been doing, being the example for the young people who you want to empower. So we're going to dive into the conversation today with this first question. What is the mindset that it takes to make a positive impact?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I think to make a positive impact, you got to be optimistic. You have to be optimistic. And I say that with the most optimism possible, because as a Black man in this country, we face so much obstacles just to get to a survival just way of living, right? So we're always in survival mode. And we was taught as young boys, your main goal every time you leave this house is to make it back to this door, right? It wasn't to, bring back more money. It wasn't to, come back a better version than you left the house. It was just making it back to the house. So because of that, what I've learned over the years is you have to be optimistic around this fight that we're consistently fighting. And through that optimism, you have to be positive, because no matter how much negative energy is pushed upon your route, your path, your direction, through the work, through the people who govern your work, et cetera, just the powers that be, you always find the positiveness in whatever it is that you're doing that keeps you focused on that ultimate goal, that ultimate vision that you have. So I would say be optimistic alongside having that vision of where you want to be in a certain amount of time, and don't be afraid to, jump through those hoops for what you believe in.
And I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. Even as Black men or Black boys, sometimes what we hear a lot is to, yes, make it back home because of all the different things that's going on. And it can also be dependent on your environment because some environment are more serious than some. So it's like always about being that survival mode just to make it home alive, as you shared. But I really appreciate the perspective of how to make a positive impact is to have that optimistic mindset because things are going to happen on the journey, no matter what resources you have, no matter the environment you're in, no matter what connections you have, and things will happen. And if you're not optimistic, when things are not going your way, sometimes you will succumb to the things that are happening around you that are not positive. But when you are optimistic, despite the challenges, you're more likely to find a way to make what you want to happen. Um, which leads me to my next question. And most of these questions will be around what we can do as Black men. So my next question to you is, what advice do you have for the men listening and how they can play a role in creating positive change?
Wow, another good question. I think at the foundation, we have to take the pressure off our Black women in this work. Being in education is a woman-led industry. And we have to see ourselves as educators, both traditional and non-traditional. And we have to take up spaces like this. We have to be able to come together and have those hard conversations, but also be able to organize together in spite of our differences, whatever they may be. But one of the main messages that I send across the country to my cohort cities and all of the women who are taking on this battle with so much passion is my job is to take some of that pressure off of you and challenge our men to take on that pressure, right? And it kind of takes me back to what Michelle Obama said on her book tour back in, I don't know, whenever she was on her first book tour, when she said, "We coddle our boys and raise our girls." And I think that is 100% true. One of the most accurate statements that I've come across as it pertains to engaging our boys, especially with our moms. And we have to raise our boys to understand that we have a mission, we have a purpose to fulfill as Black men, and that is to take some of the pressure off the women. And history shows that our Black women has been the brunt of a lot of the change, they've been the foundation of a lot of the change that we benefit from now. So if we're going to really create positive change as Black men in particular, then we have to start to position ourselves to be the change and become that change, whether it's through thought leadership, through collaboration, community building, and just getting our hands dirty. So yeah, it's so much more, but I think the first thing we need to do is we have to take the pressure off of our women, and we have to put ourselves in that position to be the bearers of the pressure for raising our boys.
I agree with you 100%. We have to be there. We have to be at the forefront to be the change. And research have said, once we step up, being it in the classroom as a Black male, we empower not even just the Black male student, but we empower all students. So it's important, as you mentioned, that we step up. And I support you 100%. Take the pressure off the Black woman. We have to lead the way when it comes to the change we want to see, when it comes to the change that needs to happen. We need to lead the way. And as you mentioned, that we need to start to position ourselves for the change we want to see. So we have to be bold. We have to be courageous. We have to be willing to bear the pressure that comes with creating change, because to create change is not going to be easy. So we have to be willing to challenge ourselves so we can challenge the environment or the community whatever change we want to see, we have to be willing to put ourselves out there. But one thing that you say that I really think as men we need to really take it up, and that is to see ourselves as educator. And as you mentioned, we don't have to be in the classroom. It doesn't have to be traditional, but seeing ourselves as educator will paint a positive picture, of us as Black men, because as we know, a lot of Black men are not in education, and that's a space that we could do a lot of positive work to change the mindset and perception and misconceptions when it comes to us as Black men. So I really appreciate you sharing that, which leads me to my next question. How can we as Black men help to change the narrative today?
Changing the narrative. First I will ask, what is the narrative, right? And what narrative are we allowing to be put forth? And I would say the third question or counter question is, how are we maintaining that narrative? So reading Dr. Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, one of the things that I took from it is how programmed we are to maintain the system of racism, right? Just through the language that we use every day. I remember reading a book and he was talking about how we, maintain racism or colorism by calling the darker skinned brothers and sisters African booty scratchers. And I remember as a youth doing that. So reading the book and then connecting to the content, it allowed me to unlock a perception or a perspective that I hadn't thought of before. So connecting it back to the question, I think the first thing we have to do is really evaluate what the narrative is today and then have a vision as to where we want to go, and we start there. So a lot of the times we try to start by saying we need to eradicate racism. The reality is we've seen racism on national TV at the Olympics in these last couple of weeks, right? So to eradicate something that is so prevalent in how we move in our day-to-day lives is not the right way to go, right? It's really evaluating what in my community can I identify, pinpoint, and then how can I effectively shift that narrative? So if in my community there is a narrative around, fathers not being present in, their children's life. Well, as a man, whether I'm a father or not, how can I start to create resources around Black fathers, single fathers, fathers who've lost custody of their children and want to have a place in their child's life, et cetera, et cetera. How can I create resources around those real world problems, right? That's a finite goal that we can obtain. And then how do we start to advocate for, making sure that single fathers have the same resources as single mothers, making sure that single fathers or aspiring fathers have the right legal support to fight against the system that wants them to be single, getting the same resources on welfare that mothers do, right? Because if you look at the history around welfare, that is created to keep the father out the household and resource the mother. It's not the other way around. So as Black men, what we have to do, in my opinion, is to start to shift the narrative that's specific to your community, but broadly, right? We want to make sure that we are resourcing ourselves to be able to navigate these systems in the ways that the system wasn't created to help us navigate through. And that is, again, that's a broad answer, but if we just do some research and reading, we'll understand that a lot of these systems weren't built for the man to be present at all, which means that we only have one place to be, and that's on the street. So we have to, again, take that narrative, whatever that narrative is, in our community specifically, right? And we have to make sure that we are addressing what is relevant to where we are currently and not try to attack something that's bigger than where we are.
That's a great perspective, because the change that we want to see, may be, global, maybe everywhere that we go. But to really make a difference with the change, as you shared, is to start where we are. And I think that's how we'll see change, because if we're not addressing the ones that are right in front of us, sometimes it doesn't even make sense to talk about the bigger picture. You see what I'm saying? It's okay to talk about a bigger picture, But if we're not doing anything where we are, we're just talking. If we really want to create change, it's important that we address the ones where we are. Doesn't matter how small it is, and if it really affects us as a individual person, as a Black male, we need to talk about it. And sometimes what we think may be the biggest problem, we sometimes may think we have to do it on our own. And sometimes is, as you mentioned, is to collaborate with other Black men and how we can make these change happen. And that's where look at the problem. These are the problems, because some of the things that we are dealing with as Black men, other Black men around us are dealing with the same thing. And to go about changing it, sometimes joining forces will provide the confidence and the courage, to address those issues so we can start to see changes. So I really like that perspective. Start where we are in our communities and address those things, especially the ones that affects us personally. And then we start from there and build from inside out into the larger world. But when we change our community, it becomes easier, to change the country. So I really appreciate that perspective. I know you have been in education for a long time, as you mentioned, for more than half your years here. So my next question to you, what or who has influenced or inspired you to pursue the path that you're on?
I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I think it was just the Black men that were leading the way for me early, giving me opportunity upon opportunity upon opportunity. Even in my times of me being, that youth that made bad decisions in this education space, and then lying about those bad decisions. And instead of, kicking me out and saying never come back, it was a teachable moment. So now for me, as I reflect on those times consistently in my work, I'm always finding the teachable moment in the interactions that I have nationally and when I was direct service with my youth. And then I think just even a lot of just the people that I've come across in these spaces, you don't have to say much to me for me to be inspired by you. Just seeing you doing well and having an intellectual conversation like we're having now is inspiring for me enough. And I think the most influential part of me being on this journey, on this path that cemented me continuing this work was when I worked in the school building and seeing the power that I had as a Black man to those youth. Black, brown, in between, yellow, red, white. It didn't matter. It was just being a Black man that wasn't in a disciplinary role, wasn't in a janitorial role, wearing my tie every day, my slacks, just presenting myself as the principal. A lot of the kids thought I was the principal of that school just from how I approached the work. And just seeing the impact that I had in my, in a sense, small position, and the staff, the faculty being able to, almost like lean into what I was doing in that system. And then seeing even the principal saying when all of the administrators was out before they're leaving, saying like, you have the ability and the freedom to make any decision that you need while we're gone, and we trust you. Just being able to build something like that in 2 years in that building was something that was like, wow, if I can be the influence for young Black men to go into education in the capacity that, in any capacity, right? I think we would see a change in our education system, especially for our Black and brown boys, that we've never seen before in this country. And, just to put the cherry on top, one of my boys from the time that I was in that school is going to school now. He just graduated. He's going to be a teacher. And he told me, like, I'm the reason that he's going to be a teacher because of the amount of time and effort and impact that I had on him when I was working with him when he was in sixth grade, fifth and sixth grade. So just that is probably one of my biggest influences that inspired me to continue down this path.
And thanks for sharing that, because as I've mentioned before, the greatest teaching moment is us being the example. And for you to be in that environment and even the leaders see the impact that you're having, it shows a lot about you as a person. Because one, you take the role seriously, but you know the impact that you're having on students, and which led to the young man wanted to become a teacher as well. Because I believe wholeheartedly, leading the way or wanting to create change is to be that example. We can teach a lot from being the example because we're not going to be able to talk to everyone. But a lot of times, what we don't realize is that more people are seeing what we're doing than we even realize. So those who are looking to us are looking up to us. Watch our behavior, watch our attitudes, watch what we're doing. And then in turn, it influenced them to be maybe something that they're not even thinking about. As you mentioned, wearing your shirt and tie at work, and these young people see you and think you are the principal of the school, shows how important it is that when we are showing up, we need to show up like we mean business, and we want to see change because we know the world have a one thing to say about us. And if we're going to change that perception or that image or that false narrative, it's going to be what we do. It's not what we say we're going to do, but what we do, because the world already have a narrative of us as Black men. And if we're going to change that narrative, it's going to be dependent on what we do each day. And again, the people are seeing us, and they have this saying that goes, to it's easier to become what you see. So the more we show up and be our best, we now in turn influence those young people to believe that they can be what they're seeing and what they're seeing through us. So, man, I really like what you're doing at such a young age, and being that positive example, because our community needs it, not just for ourselves, but the world, because the world think of us in a certain way, and for the world to change what they think about us, we have to give them something different and be intentional about it. So, man, just continue to do the great work that you're doing, because I think it is really, not think, I know it's really important, and you can change a lot of young people's lives. So we're just going to continue with the next question. Well, before we continue with the next question, what are your thoughts on mentorship?
Oh man, mentorship. I think done right, it's a game changer. I think right now mentorship is such a buzzword. Working for the Y, the system loves to use mentorship, but in this very like monolithic cadence, if you will. And we was actually just in Charlotte talking about mentorship and how to integrate it into our offerings. And a lot of mentorship programs is like a one-off, like once a month type thing. Whereas we have our association up in Albany, New York, and they do what's called an adult achievers program that is adjacent to their Black and Latinos achievers program, where their youth picks their adult to mentor them, and the adult has almost in a sense the same expectations as the youth. You have a certain amount of time that you have to show up for these kids, and if you don't or can't show up for these kids, tell us in the beginning so we don't pair you with anybody, because we take our mentorship seriously and we want to make sure that our kids' needs are first. So if you say you're going to show up, we need you to show up, but it's not just, yeah, we're going to show up and then you get to call out. It's guidelines, and there's a certain expectation, high expectation for you to show up for our kids in the allotted time that we put aside, or we tell our kids that they will have access to you every month. So I think mentorship for me is one of those things that we can put adjacent to our programming. And if done right, it can start to offset a lot of the survival behavior and the survival choices that our youth make on a day to day, right? Searching for love. If we can find love, because a lot of our Black men in particular in the street, they're not in the street because They like to be in the street. They're in the street because that's the only place that they find quote unquote love. So if we can shift that and they can find love somewhere else that doesn't force them to make survival choices that will ultimately end up in jail or them fighting for their life in a hospital bed, I think it can be very impactful. The only issue is there's a lot of dedicated time that is needed to develop those type of impactful programs. So mentorship is huge. I think we just need to make sure that we have the right people in the mentorship space. And then we have to align those people with the youth in a way that they complement each other versus just blindly attaching somebody to a kid and say, this is your mentee. Because a lot of the times the kid has specific needs and we have to speak to those versus just creating a mentorship program and saying, okay, mentor your mentee.
I really like that perspective. And yes, I do believe the mentoring can be a game changer. And I like the analogy you use where you talk about, black males who may go in the streets and to be a part of whatever group. They're not just doing it because they want to be there. They're looking for that love, that, people who show them that they matter or, what they're about. And that's where the mentorship comes in because, again, everyone needs to believe that they matter. They need to believe they're important. And being in an environment where they can be guided in the right way and feel as if they matter, I think that will change things or change how our young people see themselves. I think that is important. So I really like that perspective that you share on mentorship because I think mentorship is really important. We can really transform our communities by providing the right mentorship. And also, as you shared, people who signed up to be mentors really need to be committed, to that endeavor, because if they're not committed, it would only defeat the purpose. So I'm going to go into my next question. What is your perspective on the current climate of Black men in society today?
Man, we're lost. And I say we as in all of us, right? And I say that because we don't hold enough space together. So you think about, or just think about the spaces that we hold as Black men together. It's in sport, it's in the game, or it's working out for the most part. We don't do collegiate circles in terms of book clubs or anything like that. We don't do like healing circles. We don't do, we do like weightlifting working out, but we don't do like yoga working out or Pilates, like things that challenge our brain on a different level, right? Group stretching, things of that nature. So when I say we're lost in a box that tells us this is the only way that we can connect as Black men. Versus when we think about our women, they go shopping together. They go and talk on the phone for hours, or, they do a bunch of different things together. And in the process, they're working with one another to engage on what's going on in their life. Versus for us as men, we check in, but we check in really like surface level, right? If you don't ask, then I don't, if you don't tell, I don't ask. If I don't ask, you don't tell type thing. Like, and if we do know what's going on, in our brothers' lives, we do what we can to distract them from in the moment. Or if we need to give advice, we give it, but we give just enough so he knows that we care, but we don't go in depth. So going back to my initial point, when I say we're lost, I don't mean that we don't know what. It's just we don't take enough time to explore how. And when we start to open the floodgates and we explore our emotional intelligence with each other, with one another, absent of the woman, what tends to happen is we start to peel back the layers to understand why we react to certain things in certain ways. And I tend to often have these conversations, especially in the realm of like relationships and how we engage women and, all of these different elements of, just how we engage the building of a relationship, whether it's friendship or intimate, and how we are socialized as men. We're socialized to do all of the things that society actually faults us on. So, let's think about cheating, right? If we go to the barbershop and we say, hey, we got a girlfriend, and then, but yo, this other one, I'm interested in her. Everybody in the barbershop say, yo, as long as your girl don't know, go for it, right? We're promoting bad behavior. So then when we grow up and we got that same mindset, and we got two baby mamas now, that's lost because we're promoting this bad behavior. But in the future, when we actually act on this bad behavior, and we're trying to figure out, well, why is nothing happening in the way that it's supposed to happen, is because we're not putting what we learn from other men, our mentors, right? Why that is not right in the lens of how we live, a graceful life, if you will. So we're lost. And going back to your mentorship question, that's why mentorship is so critical if we do it right. But again, if we have a mentor and the mentor is giving information to their mentee that is directly in opposition of where we want our mentee to be, then what is mentorship? Mentorship is just the justification of bad behavior per us not aligning the mentor with the mentee and the needs of the mentee. So, and that's not, I say all that to say we're also in pretty good position. Okay. Right? Because we have a lot of men out there that do a lot of the right thing. Even on the street, you have that one OG that say, yo, you don't need to be out here. You need to be in school, right? You need to be, you got a lot of potential. You don't need to take on this life, right? So we have to find that common ground to say, okay, how do we tap into those men that's on the street that feel like they don't have anything to offer, because they actually have a lot to offer, a lot of context that can enhance a lot of the content that we know. But also, how do we take those men that have a lot of content and give them enough context to basically be in alignment with that average boy trying to figure out what's next? So lost is a very subjective description, if you will, but as long as we continue to figure out what is our North Star, what is our vision, then we become less lost, and we tend to start to get on that path towards that common goal. But right now, Black men, the Black community as a whole, we don't have a common goal because we're always intergenerationally fighting for, money and all of these things. But yeah, I think right now as Black men, we're lost for more reasons than we can go on this podcast. But I'll leave it there.
I really like your perspective. You shared a lot of points that we can unpack to create positive change within our community. From, as you start off with us as men being lost, and which you go back and shared, yes, there are Black men out there doing great things. But that brings up something really important. And that is where you shared that, we take on these negative behaviors and we bring it, into our adult life. When we were learning the behaviors, it may seem cool. And, what seems cool, we may carry it on without even questioning it, because that's what we see. And if we see more of the questionable behaviors, which to us, maybe at the time when we're learning it, doesn't seem questionable because it seems to be the norm. And as one of my mentor always say to me, why we can't change some of the things that we need to change? Because the norm becomes abnormal and the abnormal becomes the norm. So we have to look at what's going on. And if this is what society say about us, we must challenge this, or challenge ourselves not to do this that society keeps saying that we do as Black men, because society is not going to change the perception of us. We have to change that perception. We have to paint a picture that, everything may not change and everything that's not going to change overnight, but we have to be intentional about creating to change. And as you also mentioned that, yes, Black men out there are being great. Black men out there are being great fathers. Black men out there are being great providers. Black men out there are in the space, like as you mentioned, in education. So yes, they're doing well, but sometimes it is not what we see often. And you mentioned the OG in the community that can share something of benefit. And sometimes what we have to do with Black men in the community who may think they don't have something of value to share is that sometimes it's not always, oh, this is what you need to do, but it could be, this is what you don't need to do. Because you know what? I've made these mistakes. These are the things that I've done to cause me to be where I am. So we have to encourage our Black men, even sometimes after they have made mistakes. Look, you can share those as valuable life lessons. If we're going to create change, within our society. But to go back to what you shared, when it comes to us and Black men in society, yes, there are challenges that we still need to overcome. And also there are things that we're doing well, but the things that we're doing well needs to be in our faces more, so society can see more of the good things that we are doing as Black men. And my next question to you, you may have shared answers to it already, but I'm still going to ask you, what change do you want to see in general and amongst Black men?
You know, I was thinking about that, and I probably have shared a little bit in of answers to that question, but I think this answer will be less coming from Black men and more coming from systems who hire Black men. I think in general, I want to see systems support Black men in the same ways that they support Black or white men, and white women in particular, right? Being a Black man, young Black man in these systems, I see a lot of the malpractice that comes adjacent to the trajectory for Black men in these white systems. And it almost forces us to choose this or that. So it's not, so you can have the merit, you can have the years of experience, you can have all of the lived experience and context in attachment to the content. But these systems still won't see you as enough. These systems still won't promote you to, leadership roles unless you almost adhere and sculpt yourself to what they want you to be. And me as a Black man, I struggle with that, right? I struggle with being small to really, adhere or make the system feel good, especially when things are just not right, right? Anti-racism is one of those buzz words now in the nonprofit space. And these systems talk about racism in a monolithic way. And Black people, Black men, Black women are the brunt of the conversation, the start of the conversation. So then once we talk about the Black experience, the response is always, well, isn't just about Black people. This is about all people who experience racism. So a lot of when we speak truth to power and say, well, if it's about all people, then why are we using Black people or the Black experience in America to start the conversation around racism? Why aren't we using the internment camps for the Japanese? Why aren't we using the reality that the Holocaust is something that has Holocaust survivors and the descendants of survivors have gotten more reparations than Black people living in America that experienced generational trauma from chattel slavery, right? When we bring up things like this, the system tends to push back and say, wait a second, we're not talking about that, right? So when that happens for Black men in particular, we're like, well, is this somewhere that we want to be? Is this somewhere that my mental health can be sustained when I know that the system doesn't really care about me or what I believe or the advancement of people who look like me? And then where do I go? Right. So this answer has nothing to do with Black men, because you can find a random Black man on the street and ask them about racism, and they'll give you a whole dissertation, right? It's more about what systems are willing to accept Black men as they are, and then develop them into the professionals that we want them to be, and teach them how to tie a tie, and teach them how to represent themselves in a pseudo professional way, because professionalism is a subjective thing, to where they can lead these nonprofit organizations, these for impact organizations, or they can learn how to start their own, which kind of goes back to we're lost, right? Because a lot of the skills that we want our people to have, we tend to learn from the job market. But if the job market sees our application and says, we don't want that person because they don't fit the mold that we typically hire, then we lose out on opportunities that we're never given because of how these systems are structured. So to answer that question, I would actually say I would want to see these systems accept us as we are. So then we can start to build the momentum to be what we want to be and obtain the visions that we have for our people, for our communities, and then just for the advancement of society as a whole.
Man, let me say this. Your response is well said, to say the least. You have touched on such an important topic when it comes to us as Black men, because you may have heard that we have to be twice as good to get just as half of everyone else. But just to listen to your response, yes, to change who we are, to fit the mold of society so we can get the opportunity shouldn't be the case. It should be okay that we are accepted. Yes, we need to have the professionalism to work in certain environment, but you're right. Sometimes just because you're Black or we are Black, we don't get the opportunity. And if we don't get the opportunity, we're not going to be able to have that experience. And if we're not having the experience or having the opportunity, we're not going to have the mobile, upward mobility within our communities. Because yes, we're not getting what will help us to change our social status. And sometimes we work hard, we put in the work, we get the education. And sometimes even with the education, we still don't get the opportunity. And I've came across an article that says for Black men at times, the more qualified we are, it can even be more difficult to get the jobs because people become threatened by who we are. So sometimes it's not just not showing up as to fit the mold, but we could go to school, get all the experience, all the education, and still don't get the opportunity because people are feeling threatened by who we are. And I really like that, that you share about the system needs to provide the same support as they provide for white men and women as they should provide for Black men and Black women. I think within an organization, if those things are happening, we will see more people stay within the organization when it's fair for everyone to become their best self. Because what I strongly believe as human beings, we are the most valuable asset an organization will have, our community will have. And if as Black men, if we can get the opportunity to become the best version of ourselves, we will transform our communities. But we have to get the same opportunity, the same resources, and don't get put aside just because of who we are. If change needs to happen, and I believe, for the country to be at its best, we as people have to be at our best. And to be at our best, we have to have similar opportunity or support so we can become the best, so we can make our contribution to our communities and to our country. So, the country can have all the resources, the human capital resources as possible. So I really like your approach on the climate, not the climate, but the change you want to see in general and amongst Black men. So that leads me to my next question, kind of shifting gear a little bit. What was a pivotal moment in your life? I know you shared a pivotal moment when the young man share with you that he wants to be a teacher because of you. But do you have any other pivotal moment that you want to share?
Oh man, I feel like I have a bunch of them. Randomly, I would get inboxes from, my old youth, saying like it was because of you that I went to ROTC and, became a military member or things of that nature. Um, from when I was younger, like still in high school, assistant counselor, at summer camp, etc. But I think a pivotal moment for me would actually date back to when I was a youth. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, was when I was a counselor in training, and we were outside playing, and we weren't, as counselors in training, we were never supposed to be alone with kids because we are also kids, so we do kid things. And at that moment, me and the other CIT was alone with the kids while the counselor was taking some kids to the bathroom. So we were swinging the kids by their arms and legs. And, we were swinging them and letting them go. So everybody it was, just innocent playing. And basically, one of the kids, when we let him go, he twisted in the air and landed on his shoulder and basically sprained it. So, like as if they were our sibling. We was like, don't say nothing, da 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 da. And he went home and told his mom that his shoulder was hurting, and she said what happened, and he told her what happened, and like they did a whole investigation. We was like, yeah, we don't know what happened. We didn't do anything. And the black man that was in charge of everything, he did his investigation and he met with us, and he basically said like, yeah, I've basically interviewed everybody. I know what happened, so I'm giving you the opportunity to tell me the truth. Like, you don't never got to lie to me, etc. So we ended up telling him what happened. And he was like, "Yeah, I knew it. Thank you for telling me." Like, and this basically, like, this is a fireable offense, but since I gave you the opportunity to right your wrong, we're not firing you, but don't let this happen again, basically, right? Because we were counselors in training, so it was still a youth program. So he had an option to either fire us because we had already lied, or to listen to us and coach us through why we shouldn't lie in these situations, and, basically tell the truth of what happened, because it ultimately helps everybody get to a common goal
Correct.
versus, the parent coming and they're mad and things of that nature. So that's one of the most pivotal moments in terms of why I'm still in this work, because it was an opportunity given, and he consistently to this day gave me opportunities and gave me opportunities, which ultimately led to me being the national coordinator. So here's the kicker. That happened basically probably like 2010,
Yeah.
around 2010, the summer of 2010. So the summer of 2021, I am at the YMCA in Rochester, and I have my summer youth employment program. So I have my youth come in, teenagers 14 and 15. And one of my youth was like, "My mom recognized you." And I was like, what do you mean?" And she was like, "Yeah, she said, is that your, counselor or, leader or whatever?" And she was like, "Yeah." So she was like, "Ask him if he ever swung a kid by his like hands and like," and I was like, "How does she know that?" So I ended up talking to the mom, and I had the second generation of her kids.
Wow.
So as a youth, I had the son who was now like 20 years old at the time, and she recognized me from that moment.
Wow.
So it was a time for me to close that loop, because as a youth, I didn't talk to the parent or whatever. But I was like, I went out there, we ended up connecting, and I apologized. She was like, "No, I understand, you was a kid and kids do kid things. It was just I needed to get to the bottom of it because that was my baby." But it's one of those things where it's like, when you give, going back to that optimism and like that positive energy, when you put out positive energy into the universe, people tend to give you more grace and handle you with more grace. And in that time, I didn't have to apologize. That happened over, 15 years ago ish at that time. Not 15, probably like 8 years ago. But the reality is she remembered my face. And when I was able to connect with her as an adult, and I have now her daughter, it was one of those things where even if it happened, over 8 years ago, I still felt the need to apologize and just connect with that person because at the end of the day, this was the adult Devin talking to the mom that remembered me from that moment. So I think those happenings is like pivotal moments, like little small pivotal moments that allow me to stay on the course through the opportunity that was given to me, not only by, my leader at the time, the black man, but that black woman that didn't advocate for me losing my job, right? Because she could have said, hey, I don't want him working with my kid no more. But she never did that. So yeah, I think that's a pivotal moment that I can leave you with. But again, we need more of that in our community because the more that we coach
Yeah.
during teachable moments, the more often that we'll have more black men re-engaging behavior, positive behaviors, and making positive decisions as they move through life.
I think that is important because sometimes we just push that young person or just people in general aside because of the mistake that they have made. And maybe it could be just one mistake. And we have to realize that this person, we can, as you mentioned, this can be a teachable moment for the person. And sometimes we push some people aside and they never recover from that mistake because now they start to blame themselves for everything that, started to go wrong. And then we could have helped that person to learn the mistake, but also help, in the future for those who may um, do the same thing, help them to coach them through that moment because we all need grace. And it's good for you to have a coach at a time who understands the importance of teaching you what you need to do and how being honest can take you places that you may not even be thinking about. And we all need that at times. Sometimes that's what's going to change our lives and in turn change the lives of many other people. So I appreciate you sharing that experience. And because we sometimes just push people away because of one mistake that they make. And, we could use that as an opportunity to change that person's life, to help them to see the bigger picture and why it's important to be honest about the situation, despite how severe it is. And still being honest can help to put you in position for future opportunities because that's going to be your character. So if you talk about it and share about what happened, it can help you to get opportunities later. So my next question to you is, and this may be tied to what you just shared because there are a lot of lessons in it. What life lessons have you learned late on your journey that you believe is important and can benefit this current generation?
Oh man, lead with grace, always. Um, I am one of the few hip hop educators in the education space. I was introduced to the fusing of hip hop culture and education through Christopher Emden when I went to one of his trainings or trainings that he did up in Rochester one summer. And I do work group ciphers every month with my cohort cities. And I do that because the cipher leads with grace, innovation, and rigor always. So when you enter the cipher, you're always in always entering a space of love, innovation, and rigor, right? So when you coming out of there, people is challenging the craft that you just put forth, right? They're also challenging how innovative you are. You can't go into the cipher and replicate what was already in the cipher. You have to be original. But all of that is coming from a space of grace. And me being, having a trauma background, having a restorative practices background, grace is the center of both of those. Even though it's not overt in there, grace is the center of both of those to listen to somebody's trauma and find the grace to figure out how to help them through it in spite of is the epitome of what grace is, of what love is. And all of my work comes down to being graceful, being optimistic, figuring out how can I bridge this gap to where I'm finding the positive message in probably the most negative scenario or situation. And that is something that everybody can learn from. And I was trauma, therapeutic crisis intervention, trauma informed care, restorative practices is something that I picked up back in 2019, 2018. And that has been the foundation of my success at the Y all the way through. And the reason why is because it's taught me or reinforced how to lead with grace in spite of somebody's story, and not to treat somebody as, adjacent to what their story says about them or their environment. Because everybody alongside their story is a person. And if we can build the person in spite of the story, then we tend to show them how to be a person and how to exist in spite of whatever they feel is defining them. So, to answer the question, something that I learned late is to always lead with grace, even in the face of racism, and, figuring out what's the best way to address the things that we feel we need to address that's heavy on our heart, through the lens of gracefulness. And what you'll see is you'll see a weight lifted off of you. So you're not carrying around the burden of being Black in America all the time. While you acknowledge what that means, you're moving fluently. You're flowing through, the air. You're moving to the flow of, or to the beat of your own drum. And what I'll say to close that is, when I was at the school, the assistant principal would often ask me randomly, how do you walk around and always have a smile on your face? Always in a good mood. Like, I've never seen you in a bad mood. And we deal with the same things. And I was like, well, because I understand that the kids, the demographic that I'm dealing with, they don't really know what they're doing, right? They're immersed in so much trauma to where a lot of this is just survival. So because I know that if I get yelled at in a heightened emotional state, I know that they're not yelling at me. They're just trying to express what they're feeling without the words. Right. So if I can decode that for them, and I address them with grace and love, and I give them a hug, even though they're telling me that they hate me, the love always overpowers the hate. We know this, right? So yeah, I think lead with grace always, even when somebody else is telling you, well, why are you always being positive? And everything else will just fall into place.
That's an interesting or important perspective, especially when you are a person of service. Because to serve, you're not going to have people always agreeing with you. But being that you're in that space of service, you have to understand that what someone is experiencing may have nothing to do with you. So it's not because you are talking to them, it's not because of what you do. It could very well be what they are dealing with. And that's a great perspective to have, because if we think everything that someone does, it's because of me, then I'm going to be angry when I'm not supposed to. I'm going to act out of character when I'm not supposed to, because someone is acting up in a certain way that I don't like. So that's a great reminder to all of us to lead with grace and to understand that we are there to help mediate what's going on sometimes. It's not just to correct the person because of their behavior. We have to show them love despite them not showing us love. And I think that can really make our environment much better. Because we don't have to go head and head with everyone that's not in agreement with us. And once we can have that love first, I think a lot of things will change. And I like that you have gone through the restorative processes, because that really gives you a deeper understanding of what's happening with the person, that we're not supposed to just, push them aside. We need to have an understanding of what's going on, not just us having the understanding, but help the young people to have that understanding of what may be the cause for them to act or do the things that they do. So I really appreciate your perspective on leading with grace. I think that is important. But before we close this conversation, before I ask my final question, where can the listeners find you and help support your work that you're doing to make a difference?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Devin Malik Anglin. I am me on social media as I am in real life. On social media, King Dev Bridges. That is just one of my, it's King Dev Bridges. My middle name means king. Obviously, my name is Devin. And then Bridges, people always say I'll always find a way to bridge the gap, which is a great segue to this conversation. So I've always just coined that. And then I'm in the process of developing my education podcast. So if you follow my social media, you'll be able to, follow that. But I also have a podcast called Introspective Insight. The Black Wall Street podcast is raw, unapologetic dialogue where we center Afrocentricity in the Black experience just through introspection, right? So one's own mental and emotional thought processes on anything and everything that is society. So those are different mediums that you can find me on. And, I just love having these conversations and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Man, thanks for being here. Man, you have shared a lot of great insights and perspective. And for a young person at your age to think in the way that you are and to have the insights and perspective, that is admirable. It shows your commitment to the Black community because you're not just talking, you are sharing information and insights from not just your own experience, but what you have learned from others who are doing the work or who want to see change. So that is admirable. And, I'll say, man, just keep up the good work because sometimes to change the mindset of young people, the next generation, it's important that they see someone that is closer to their age doing the work that needs to be done. So, man, you are doing just that. And that is important for all of us as we move forward. So my final question to you is, what impact do you want to have on the world?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. I just want to be able to leave a legacy that can be replicated by the next person. I think of Martin Luther King. I think of Malcolm X. Um, I think of Fred, the Panthers. I think about all those people, but also think about Nipsey Hussle, Jay-Z, and just their ability to connect with people on different levels from different backgrounds. So I just hope that I can leave a legacy that can be replicated to where understanding that we're understanding where we are in society, but we also fight and continue to fight to position ourselves for success. And if we can't find that in the white system, then we build our own systems to exist in, which is goes down another rabbit hole of information that we can talk about on another day. But I think part of it for me is I want to continue to impact the lives of young people as I have already, but also build the infrastructure for organizations, for community youth development, education, and continue to support the development of Black men in this country to be the forces that they are in our communities, but in boardrooms and in CEO positions, and so on and so forth. So I just want to leave, a lasting impact that can be replicated by other Black men coming behind me, and to be loud in saying that we want to take some of the stress from our Black women and we want to take on some of that stress so we can level out the playing field and we can focus on advancing our people in the various areas of this country. Because the one thing that doesn't change is poverty. Poverty is the same no matter what zip code it's in. So we want to make sure that we are in spaces to affect what poverty looks like or to completely eradicate poverty and whatever that may look like. But that's not up for me to decide. That's up for community to decide on what the eradication of poverty look like and what generational wealth can be built that's adjacent to wherever we are at the time that we're talking about generational wealth.
And it goes back to what you had shared earlier, that sometimes the change needs to start where we are immediately and work from there. Because we know that our communities sometimes are dealing with the different financial strains, right? And to change some things, we have to start where we are. It could be teaching about financial literacy. It could be talking about what I myself can really contribute where I am, and more than just the bigger picture, because the bigger picture can get you overwhelmed and making you thinking that, you know what, man, I can't change anything. But yes, we all can create change. It may be to join forces with someone who is passionate about the same thing that I'm passionate about, because it's not always about creating our own. It could be to join other people. But I like the perspective of doing things that can be replicated by others that's coming behind us. We have to be bold enough. We have to be courageous enough to do things that the next generation will want to do, and that can help to change our communities. Mr. Anglin, it was a pleasure talking with you today. And what I would say, man, just continue to do the work that you're doing to make a difference.
I appreciate you. And it was a pleasure talking to you as well. Hope that we can continue having a conversation.
No problem. We will. This will not be the only conversation we have as we go forward on this journey. And listeners, as always, our goal is to bring to you people we believe will make a difference. The Black Male Impact is where positive changes are inspired. Please continue to support us as we continue on this journey to make a difference. Thanks again for your support. Until next time.